I've had the Sony FX3 for 3 years and something changed the day that I got it. The FX3 changed the way I looked at filmmaking, it raised the bar for me and my content, and I almost felt immediate more pressure, in a good way. Today I was thinking I'll go through how this camera has changed my filmmaking, my setup, the settings that I use, the simple explanation of Cine EI, and finally why I think this camera still is the best camera for video in 2024.
My name is Christian Warwick. I'm a professional filmmaker and photographer. I work with brands like Oakley, Red Bull, and BMW. I'm here to help you become a better photographer and filmmaker and hopefully get you a better and more sustainable creative business.
In 2021, I found Danny Gevirtz's channel, and after watching his videos, I was sold. I wanted the Sony FX3. So how has this camera changed my filmmaking? I used to be a Panasonic GH5 user, and my content mostly consisted of slow motion footage. Match that with music and sport content, that was me. The purchase of the FX3 kind of marked a change in my career as a filmmaker, and I would contribute a lot of my progress as a filmmaker to this exact camera. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it's the camera that changed my films, but the camera definitely changed the way I thought about the films that I made. It got me into professional lighting, audio, compositions, and storytelling. Going from a world where 180 frames per second was king to a world where all I cared about was the look and the story. The first thing I did when I got the FX3 was to make a film different from everything that I made previously. Together with my friend Magnus, I made a film about a lonely kid. I remember being so proud. I finally made a film, not a video. Do you understand what I mean when I say that there's a difference between a film and a video? In short, the FX3 indirectly taught me more about new aspects of filmmaking. The XLR inputs made me more aware of good audio. Being able to record professional sound straight into the camera was a big change. I also found myself studying lighting and composition in a different way. I thought I owed this camera to be a better filmmaker, as I now own a camera that in my eyes was better than me. I honestly don't see why you would need a camera like this if you're not interested in becoming a better filmmaker and just improve. The camera is good, but it's our task to make it perform. In short, the camera made me more hungry to learn, create, and improve as a professional filmmaker. So what does my setup normally look like? But first, please subscribe to my channel. If you find this content useful, I would just really appreciate if you hit subscribe. I've had several setups for my FX3, from stripped down with the top handle only to a much bigger setup where my clients are actually commenting on how big it looks. One thing my setups have in common is that they always serve a purpose. My most used setup as of lately has been the Go Big version. I have a full Condor blue cage, a handle extension, a base plate, V-mount battery plate plus the battery itself, rods, and a Cinemagic arm for my small HD Cine 7 monitor. In addition to this, I'll add my Sennheiser MKH416. If I need a lav, I'll also add this. All of this kind of turns my camera into a beast size-wise. And you also have to keep in mind then that this makes it very heavy, which is a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. When shooting things in motion, when I'm in motion, a heavy camera setup will give you more stability. Because all of the FX3 has good stabilization, it's not so good that you can do whatever you want without getting any shake. When filming these hockey players, it really came in handy, as I was on skates myself. I didn't need to have a gimbal with me. I need to emphasize that my style is to get this handheld look for most of my content, so I'm not bothered by some shaking here and there. On the other side, this heavy build also means that you need to be prepared for more load on your arms and upper body in general. If you have a full day of shooting with the setup that I just mentioned, you'll probably feel pretty tired at the end of the day. But another pro of the heavy build is what I mentioned a minute ago. The clients like how professional it looks. It's such a silly thing to take into consideration, but first impressions and the client's feeling of this being a proper camera should not be taken lightly. This weird little thing is something you need to keep in mind. Your client might actually look at the gear that you're using, and that might be part of how they interpret how professional and good you are. The setup that I use when filming a sport event or in situations I know I need to be very mobile is a little different. I strip it down much more. Rarely down to the out-of-package version, almost like it is now. I usually keep the cage on, in addition to the top handle extension. The extension makes it easier to get a good grip. And I know that I'm not the first one commenting on the top handle being too short. I usually like using an external monitor, and if I want to move fast, I'll use a smaller one like the Small HD Action 5, or I'll go old school and just use the display on the camera. For a lot of those shoots, I don't even need audio, but if I want to record some audio at these events, then I'll use a smaller shotgun, the Daiti for instance. I have found myself looking at other YouTubers and wanting to get the same setup as them, but I don't think that's always the best idea. I think it's important for you and for me to just look at what we usually make, what are our needs, and then make a decision based on that. If I only showed you the overkill version of my setup and you were filming marathons, I probably would have messed it up for you because it wouldn't have worked with your workflow. I do recommend getting a cage and the extension, not just for the weight of the camera, but because it also gives you more options when it comes to attaching or connecting monitors, grips, and other things you might want on your camera. Speaking of building videos is not just about the camera, the audio, or the lighting. It's about storytelling, which is impossible without good music. Thanks to MusicBed and me being a friend of the brand, I am able to justify spending so much time making YouTube videos. Get a free trial by hitting the link down below. Okay, now to the controversial topic, the settings. I'm sure no matter what I say on this, there will be people disagreeing and there will be opinions about it. But here's a quick, not so quick, overview of the settings that I use. The file format is the XAVC SI 4K for client work and the XAVC SI DCI for my YouTube videos. The last setting gives you more of a horizontal, wider resolution, and I find it to be better because a lot of people are watching the videos on their phones and it will fill the whole screen. A question that is being asked a lot is the difference between the XAVC SI and the XAVC S. And I'm not going to be too technical on this. I have decided that I can live with bigger files and the quality of the footage is great with this setting that I'm using. Lately there's also been a discussion about the codecs on this, but in short there has been a challenge with the XAVC S in post-production. Even though the files are smaller in size, they're harder to work with. The XAVC SI automatically sets the recording setting to 250M 422 10-bit at 25 frames per second, and that first number just reflects the frame rate that you're using. So for me, I'm just sticking to the settings that I've been using for a while and it's worked out well for me. And if you have any good arguments why I shouldn't, please let me know in the comments. One thing that is important to mention when talking about this is that you might need a CF Express card to be able to even use all the settings on your camera. These cards are very expensive, but some settings just won't work and you can't take full advantage of your camera without it. A normal SD card like this one, Lexar V90, 300 megabytes per second, is good for just about everything with your camera, but not the 100 frames per second at 10-bit. I also don't trust the normal SD cards as much as I trust the CF Express A cards. For log settings, I use the Cine EI settings, and I will get back to this later in the video. But when it comes to the colors, I will use C-Gamma 3 Cine S-Log 3. Up until recently, you were not able to use the angle setting on the shutter mode, but they have finally added this. That means you can set it to angle, you'll have the 180-degree angle at all times, and you won't have to worry about changing it when changing frame rates. Just quick, if you don't know what the 180-degree rule is, it's just kind of this basic rule within filmmaking that your shutter speed should be twice the frame rate that you're shooting in. This is just to give you this natural look. I can't believe it took so long to get it, but I'm very happy that we finally do. That being said, there are times when I want to shoot with a slow shutter. That could be because of an effect or just to mix it up a little bit. And if I want this effect, I will change to speed in shutter mode instead of the angle. And you can easily add this setting to your favorites if you want to have easy, quick access to this setting. We will get back to ISO when I touch on Cine EI, but just quickly, I prefer to stay at 800 for most of my shots as long as I'm able to control the light. But I only use the base ISO, so 800 and 12,800, nothing in between. But then again, using the term ISO feels wrong at times when it comes to the FX3. More about that soon. I prefer to set the white balance to value rather than indoors, cloudy or sunny. This because I usually film with several cameras and I want the white balance to be as similar as possible so I can easily match it when I'm grading in post. 5500 is my go-to if I can control the light and if I'm filming outside. If I'm only filming with one camera, then I might find myself setting the settings to sunny or cloudy. For years, I filmed log without a LUT on the display. Note that I'm not talking about having a LUT burned into the camera or into the shot. I'm talking about having a LUT there to kind of just help you to see what it will look like after, a preview. I usually have my own LUT on my monitor, but if I don't use a monitor, I will use it on the FX3's display. If you're interested in buying this LUT, you can just hit the link down below. After years of using the FX3 and external monitors, I have found that I don't even use false colors or any tools to see my exposure settings. But having a histogram does make it a bit easier to know. As long as I can stay true to my settings and look at it with my LUTs, I feel confident that it's well exposed. Just make sure you don't have the LUT activated on both camera and monitor, because then you will not get the right feel of what it will look like. Although the autofocus on the FX3 is great, I like to be able to go manual. That's why I choose to have peaking on the display. I have the peaking level on mid and the peaking color is blue, just because that's what I was used to with the Panasonic. If I use the zebra levels, I will have that at 70. One of the last settings I want to talk about is the steady shot or the stabilization. Since I usually film handheld, I will use the active, which is the most stable function of the FX3. Keep in mind that this will crop the image. The active steady shot is not as good as the dynamic function on the ZV-E1, but I was able to get these shots handheld in New York while inline skating. Audio settings. Make sure that the settings are correct on your top handle. First, make sure the handle audio is on, the switch is on the side, then make sure you use the right XLR input and that you have selected the right one. And then if I shoot with two XLRs, I will use in 1 and 2, but for most of the time, since I only have one microphone on the camera, I will use in 1. When the switch on the handle is on, you won't get any audio if you don't have a microphone connected to it. If you shoot with the handle audio off, you will get the internal camera audio recording. I have messed this up both ways several times, and it's super annoying, so just keep that in mind. Also, if your microphone needs power to function, make sure you have it at the mic plus 48V setting on the handle. For most situations, I have it at audio, but in some cases, I need to manually adjust it. Make sure you wear headphones when it's important to get good audio and look at the levels on your camera. Okay, so the last important setting to know about is the auto power when the camera reaches a certain temperature, so it doesn't overheat and turn off. You'll find this under Setup, Power Setting Option, and Auto Power Off. So like I said, this will keep your camera from turning off when it gets warm. Not that I've had a lot of issues with the FX3 and overheating, but you need to turn this setting on and keep it at high. Otherwise you might have it turn on. turn off on you. Now I've heard the comments and I feel like I'm gonna be arrested, but I'm gonna talk about the Cine EI. I'm not going to lie. The first time I heard about it, I was close to terrified. I was worried I'd mess it up, and I thought it was easy to mess it up with these settings. And it kind of is. But the truth is that it also just made everything much easier. You just need to look at it in the right way and be aware of how you use it. In the log shooting settings, we have 3 different shooting modes: Flexible ISO, Cine EI Quick, and Cine EI. The first one is what I was used to from a previous camera, and that's your standard ISO. That's kind of how we use ISO in still photography. You adjust the ISO, and as you change from 800 to 1000, it will affect your image and the amount of light going into your camera. Lower ISO is better than highest ISO, as we get grainy shots if we go too high. But with the FX3 and its dual base ISO, you should not use it in this way. In S-Log3, you should use 800 or 12800. Easy as that. 12800 ISO with no grain is what the FX3 is known for. Use it. Keep in mind that 12800 is very good, but if you can, use 800. It's always better. Cine EI Quick and Cine EI serve in a different way. And when I explain this to others, I'm actually trying to have them forget about ISO for a minute. With a dual ISO and Cine EI, all you need to think about is 800 and 12800. Forget about everything else. Look at this as the only 2 settings that you have. Say you're filming somewhere and you feel like the shot is too dark. Switch to 12800 and adjust settings like aperture or use an ND filter. That is, if you're not able to control the light yourself. Always choose to change the light if you are able to. Don't change the value on the screen to say 1000 EI instead of 800. Why? Because you're not changing the exposure at all. At least not in the way you think you are. With Cine EI, whether it's with the quick function or not, you will always be filming with a base ISO. The camera automatically sets it to the base ISOs if the camera says 800 or 3200 EI. You will always be at 800 ISO if we still use the term ISO. What might trick you into thinking that you're not is that the screen will show you a difference in exposure. When adjusting this, you are actually just playing around with the dynamic range. Look at this chart. By changing the exposure index, what we call the EI, down, you'll get more details in the dark areas and you'll be able to bring that back later. And the other way around if you do it with the brighter areas and the higher EI values. Mark Youngbluth explained this well to me a few years ago. If you change the exposure index in Cine EI, it has absolutely no effect on the recorded file because the ISO is and stays at 800 or 12800. It only has an effect on the exposure if you compensate the change of the exposure index, EI. For example, by changing the aperture, the shutter speed, or more or less ND. Changing the EI in Cine EI mode will only affect the monitor display on your camera. You can check this by deactivating the LUT. Just look here. That is probably also why I don't see a change when I have it on an external monitor. You can change the exposure index so that you see the image on screen as it then should look in post-processing, but it doesn't change the exposure. So an example. If you are filming a scene that is relatively dark and you want to have details in the shadows or a nice gradation of the shadows, you can overexpose the image, say 2 stops. The image will be brighter on the screen accordingly, and now you can reduce the exposure index by 2 stops so that you can see on the screen what the final image will look like. So the exposure index is just a tool for you to see when you have the LUT on the camera, not for you to change the ISO. This is pretty complicated and you might have to go back and look at this part of the video again. So what's the difference between the Cine EI and the Cine EI Quick? If you were to change the base ISO with the thumb wheel, it will simply stop at 3200 with a Cine EI. You'll have to manually change the base ISO for it to go over. And that's why I have added a customized shortcut when I hit the ISO button on top. It automatically gives me a base ISO of 12,800. So for my ISO settings, I will only use this button. And if I for some reason need to bring up my darker areas, I will use the technique described earlier. But for most of the time, I stay true to just the base ISO and the EI, that is 800 or 12,800. EI Quick is very much like the Cine EI, but you have to scroll all the way up, and it allows you to scroll all the way. It's easy to be fooled into thinking about ISO when you use it in that way, but you still should still remember to stay at 800 or 12,800. It's kind of ironic that it's called quick. Even though you're technically at 12,800 when you're passing 3,200, you still need to go all the way to 12,800 for it to be like normal exposure, like to 12,800. I use a Cine EI setting combined with a LUT on my external monitor, and it works like a charm. I'm sure you can find more in-depth videos about the Cine EI, but I think this is still the easiest way to look at it, at least the way I understand it. 3 years later, I have made myself some thoughts about this camera. Getting this camera was the best thing that I ever did. Less than a year after getting this, I also got myself the FX6, and these two combined with each other just gives me the best workflow and results. For interviews, the FX3 is always my B cam, and for certain shots, the FX3 is a much better tool than the FX6. For everything where I know I have to run around more, need more stabilization, or I don't want to have too big of a rig, the FX3 is my go-to. This camera is small, but it gives you so much. It looks like an old-fashioned camera. Like, it's 715 grams, 130 times 78 times 85 millimeters, and regardless of the size, you get exactly what Sony calls it, a cinema camera. Hollywood movies have been made with this camera, and I understand why. Almost 4 years after its initial release, the FX3 is the winner for any filmmaker in 2024 and 2025. I love the quality, the colors, and the ease of working with it. And when it first came out, there were things missing. The Cine EI was not a part of the initial firmware, and later they have added the already mentioned shutter speed angle and time codes. I'm a gear freak, but I don't see myself going away from the FX3 anytime soon. It's just so good. Owning the FX6 and the CVE1, I'm still not in doubt when it comes to which one I'd keep if I had to keep just one. It's this one, the FX3. I hope this didn't feel like any other Sony FX3 review, that my experiences, settings, and setup were useful, and that you'll stick around by subscribing to my channel. Thanks for being here, really appreciate that, and I'll see you in the next one.